Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Geo Institute live stream. I guess technically it could be morning or evening where you are as well. Maybe those are the only options. We're very excited today to begin a new series in the GI pantheon of live streaming. It is called Books Rock because the focus group could not come up with a better title. Now, yes, it is a play on words. There are rocks involved in many things we do, and publications are a key output, a key contribution of the Geo Institute to society and the world, and so that's why we have called it that. My name is Brad Keeler. I'm the director of the Geo Institute, and we are thrilled to have you with us today as we launch this new series. You will hear many times in the course of the next 45 to 60 minutes or so that we have published our first, well, ASCE published, GI's first manual of practice ever very recently, and we are super excited about that. It's on geoenvironmental engineering. Dimitrios Zekkos is here from our Committee on Geoenvironmental Engineering. Derrick Dasenbrock is here from our Technical Coordination Council. I'm going to say a couple things before we get to another important person who has joined us today. If you like what you see today, I truly hope that you do. You should click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Also, if you don't know anything about the Geo Institute, welcome. After you're done watching this today, head over to geoinstitute.org, and there you will find out so many things about us, including that we are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And as such, the publications director of that earnest body, ASCE, is with us today to talk a little bit about publications and a little bit about our publication. Her name is Dana Compton, and she is going to speak to you now.
Hi, thanks, Brad. So yes, Dana Compton, I'm managing director and publisher at ASCE. So a main prerequisite of my job is to believe that books rock. So very happy to be here. We are super excited that GI has now published its first manual of practice with ASCE. So glad to be here to celebrate MOP 159 with Derrick and Dimitrios. So if you aren't familiar with manuals of practice, these are books that are developed by ASCE technical committees under an ASCE sponsor. So in this case, GI. And what sets them apart from other ASCE book publications is that they are all independently peer-reviewed by what we refer to as a blue ribbon panel. So it just gives essentially a higher level of authority to the information that you're going to get out of a manual. So that's about all that I have to say today. Again, really excited about GI's first manual, and looking forward to hearing the conversation between Derrick Dasenbrock, Derrick, and Dimitrios Zekkos, who authored the manual. I'll pass it over to you, Derrick.
Well, cool. Thank you so much. Happy to have everybody with us today on the live stream, or if you're watching later at some time. I'm Derrick Dasenbrock. I work with the Technical Coordination Council. I'm the current chair. And the Technical Coordination Council is a group that's in charge of working with the Geo Institute's 20 different technical committees. We also have one new task force for energy geotechnics. So it's an exciting opportunity to work with a number of people that do a variety of great things. A lot of our technical committees are working on publications like the one we'll be talking about today. Others are involved in putting together specialty conferences. There's one coming up about environmental geotechnics and other topics, Geoenvironmental. It's in Portland, Oregon, September 8th through 11th. So if you've thought about where you might like to go to pick up a physical copy of the Manual of Practice or just to hang out with your peers, head over to the GI website, look up Geoenvironmental 2024, and have that opportunity to have geoenvironmental engineering in the forefront of that conference. So with that, I'll introduce our first GI Manual of Practice interviewee. I should say I was a little confused, but given the fact that manuals of practice were up to 159, but that's for the whole of ASCE, I'm to understand, so we can still be proud that this is GI's first. So, Dimitrios, you're a professor of civil environmental engineering at UC Berkeley. Research focuses on infrastructure resilience, informatics, landfills, geoenvironmental engineering, earthquake engineering, and you're the past chair of the Geoenvironmental Engineering Technical Committee. Welcome.
Hi, Derrick. Very nice to be here today. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk today.
Cool. All right. So whose idea was it to put together a manual of practice? That seems like a relatively heavy lift. Was it you as the chair at the time, the whole committee? Did everybody just decide we need this, that people are calling on the phone too much, we need to get something published? Or
Yeah, no, I think it was so in 2016 I took over as chair of the Geoenvironmental Engineering Committee, and I followed the leadership of Krishna Reddy, who was the chair of the committee up to that point, extremely active, had done so many things for the committee. And so my thought was that maybe we can put something together that will not be published immediately, will be a longer process, but it will be something that will stay and will last and will be very useful for the industry. I always have this, the committee also has this focus on making practical material available to the industry. And so I suggested that to the committee, and we had discussions because we realized it was going to be a lot of work, but we all together push forward to get this going in 2016. And now 8 years later, we have it published. So it was a long process, but that's, I think, it is a lot of effort to put a manual of practice together. And so, yeah, it's an exciting effort, and we're very excited to have that published now.
Okay. So as I understand it, there are, let's see, seven parts to the document. It kicks off with an introduction, and then there's waste and site characterization, waste properties, containment systems, mine waste, contaminated ground, barriers. Is there anything that's not in the manual?
Yeah, I think we try to put some themes in the content. We try to cover the breadth of geoenvironmental engineering practice, which includes a lot of course, contaminated site characterization and looking not only on the site itself, like the ground conditions, but also the groundwater conditions and the contaminant conditions, which are evolving with time. So there's a lot to do there as part of the of this type of projects. And so the contaminated site characterization, then of course, cleaning up many of the sites, remediation, and the technologies we have. So barriers, for example, associated with stopping contaminants from flowing downstream, for example. And of course, a very big part of the practice is also waste containment. And for that, particularly solid waste, being on the geotechnical side, we have a little bit more a focus on solid waste. And so, but that of course includes a variety of waste materials, so that the manual have chapters for different types of waste materials, and then all the other infrastructure that goes in order to contain these waste materials, such as the barriers and the gas systems and all the infrastructure that goes to make sure that the waste material that is disposed somewhere is not a danger to the environment short term and long term. And so we put these themes together, but the themes came after we were putting the various domains of the chapters we wanted to include. It's not comprehensive. There is, I think, if someone goes very thoroughly and say, okay, what is in here and what is not, there are things that we left out. For example, where lots of remediation techniques that we do not talk about in this manual, because we wanted to put something meaningful together without really replicating what has been done. And so, for example, in the field of remediation, there has been so much work and books, but especially manuals from the Environmental Protection Agency for each of those techniques. And so we refer to those when necessary, but we didn't say, okay, let's have a chapter on this in our manual. And we decided to to do this, and of course in the future, if people have the courage, and maybe in a decade or so, the manual could be updated. That doesn't mean this is it and it's going to be like that forever. And we can build on top of these chapters, update the existing ones, or really add new chapters if we think there's something big that is missing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess building on that, are there any you figure are really filling any gaps that you saw a need to be addressed? Somewhere, say, between where the textbooks are and and GSPs, or that I'll say maybe current specifications didn't cover, but the industry is doing. Yeah,
no, that's a very good question, and I think it's important to, because we did spend a lot of time. So why did we do this? I think. First of all, it's important, as it was mentioned before by Dana, that the manual of practice, once you go through the review process, which I will describe, has a final review process of a blue ribbon panel, which in our case included Jim Mitchell, Craig Benson, Rudy Bonaparte, and Krishna Reddy. Who reviews the whole thing. So they received, the 400-page document, and they review the whole thing and look for omissions, for weaknesses, for things that are not well presented, and provide a completely independent, which is kind of you're worried, right? You put all this effort, and we have gone through our own reviews, but of course now we have 3 or 4 very distinguished individuals who come and say, okay, here's what the problem is, and here's the good parts. And so I think the reason we went with the manual of practice is we wanted to have that work from our committee, and then a review panel, so we can actually build more of a document that has some kind of significant, I will say, review process, with the intent to provide content to practitioners that is well beyond peer reviewed, I would say. And so I think part of the idea of the manual of practice is to provide a review of the practices in geoenvironmental engineering, in our case, that are really not biased extremely. I will explain that, by my opinions or some other authors' opinions, but primarily as a consensus document. And so I think that is really where the manual, I feel, fills a gap that didn't exist, that was there. There are books, there are documents left and right that have similar material, but here was an effort, I would say a very big effort, from 50 authors from our committee, as well as people that we brought from outside the committee, 50 authors and reviewers who got involved in this. I think we have about 17 chapters, if I remember correctly, and put this document together, and then it's peer reviewed by reviewers, and then eventually by the Blue Ribbon panel. So I feel like we have put there's always room for improvement, obviously, for everything that we put together, but it was a significant effort to put something forward that if I'm a practitioner in environmental engineering and I'm saying, okay, what should I look first? I would personally start from that manual and see what is in there first. And that was the idea. Okay.
I was going to say 50 authors and reviewers sounds like quite a task. So on your committee, I mean, was there a group charged with I'll say just like organizing the authoring and the reviewing, or how did you undertake coordinating it all, I guess?
Yeah, no, I think first of all we discussed it as a committee, and we decided it would be worthwhile to pursue something like this. I had the energy to do it and the interest, so I started leading this. But then, of course, as you know, because you spend a lot of time on this, also we require volunteers to put all this effort. So and that is not easy. All the participants on this manual contributed their own time extra to everything else that they were doing. We found the chapters that we wanted to include, and then we started with the lead authors. So we identified within the committee as well as outside the committee when necessary, the lead author. And the lead author of each chapter wrote the chapter. And once we had a final chapter, not a draft, but a final chapter, this is the lead author's opinion on that chapter. And we had 2 more reviewers, at a minimum of 2, sometimes 3 or 4, 2 more reviewers who were not, and that I really believed in that idea, and we implemented it that way, who were not anonymous. The author knew who the reviewers were, and the reviewers, of course, the author. And the feedback from the reviewers was intended to be productive and ensure that from their perspective is inclusive. It doesn't have statements that are really the opinion of the lead author only, that it's something that stands, that is a broader consensus, and provide that, with their name and make sure that these comments are incorporated. So they provided the comments. They had the opportunity when they wanted to add paragraphs or sections or lines. It was not the review process that we typically have in a conference or even journal paper where someone asks a question and you have to answer it. The reviewers will say, you're missing this component, you should discuss this, the work of this is very important on that, and we use that in this area. And so the idea was to be a teamwork towards putting together every single one of those chapters. And once they provided that comment, we send it back to the authors, to the lead authors, who incorporate the comments. And then it was sent back to these reviewers. If necessary, we had additional ones until we thought, okay, this chapter is final. And once we have the final chapter, all of them together, all 17 of them together, we put it as a volume and we send it to the Blue Ribbon panel. And we had a whole other review process from the Blue Ribbon panel. So it was a lot of effort, a lot of volunteers I want to recognize, and we have, of course, in all of these documents, in each of the chapter, we explain who contributed, who wrote the chapter, who reviewed it, so that people know, because obviously every time somebody writes something, we're all biased based on our own experiences, right? And so we try to have as an inclusive process as we can. And but then, of course, the outcome is the consequence of all of this feedback. But there was a very good big group that extended beyond the committee when necessary. I want to explain that a little bit also. First of all, we made absolutely sure that every chapter has been reviewed or authored by a practitioner. We didn't want, I'm an academic myself, but I also work in the industry, and we didn't want to write a document that will be state-of-the-art, describing the latest, the greatest, and highlighting somebody specifically's research, or just the research, but more of a document that is actually of meaningful, of value to the practitioner. So as an additional mechanism, well, everybody was writing and editing with that in mind, but we all made sure that at least one practitioner was involved in every single of these chapters. And of course, also through our even at their Blue Ribbon panel review, we had Rudy Bonaparte, who is I think the leading practitioner in geoenvironmental engineering, to review the whole thing. And so throughout this process, yes, it was a very big coordination activity. We had these Google files, the spreadsheets where we're monitoring the process, and some chapters stayed behind, some of them moved forward faster. But at the end, it came all together. We were hit by COVID, which frankly did delay us at least a year. During COVID, we all, definitely myself, but I'm sure everybody else, our lives changed, and it was very difficult to keep this pushing forward. But as soon as things calmed down with COVID, we were able to revamp our energy and complete this project. Sorry, I spoke for too long, but I want to describe all of these details. No,
that was, I was going to say that was, I enjoyed hearing about the process, because that actually just sort of leads into my next question. So if another one of our GI technical committees is thinking of doing a manual of practice, what are your like top 3 tips that you would provide them if they're interested in saying, hey, I'm on the risk committee, or I'm on the grouting committee, or any thoughts as to what advice you'd give to your colleagues?
I think a few things. Number one will be just thinking of the output in order to be quality, to make of quality content, make sure that it's inclusive, and it's a very inclusive process. Nobody has all the expertise that is needed for documents like this. And then so the more people are involved, the better. I think that's in my view. I am the lead editor. It was mentioned that I'm the author, but I'm the editor of the whole document with lead authors for each of the sections that this manual has. And I was reading all of this. I was learning. Oh, okay, this is this was very good to see it all together. And so I think the inclusiveness of the process is very, very important in putting a document like that together. Number 2, I think, is the team, making sure that the people who are involved are really committed to this. Like they don't, we're all doing things for our committees, for our Geo Institute, for other organizations. This is an additional one, and people need to be committed to that additional specific thing, because it is a big effort, and it requires a lot of time on their end to make sure that they do it as well as possible. And it's not easy to put chapters like that together. It's easier to put a chapter of your own work, of your own case history, of your own research. That, in my view, it's easier than trying to write a document or a chapter that is including really presenting the big picture of the whole topic that you're tackling. And the third comment that I will say is the schedule. Because we're all volunteers, it's not like you can force anyone to do this, but you need to stay as close as possible to the schedule. I didn't think it will take us 8 years, of course, to publish this, but it's not easy, because when somebody writes a 30-page or a 40-page document at the level that will be reviewed at the level that it has with additional reviewers and the blue ribbon, this takes time. And so trying to stick to the schedule and when that is violated, trying to find solutions on what to do. I think it's very, very important so that you can actually push it over the line and make sure that the whole thing comes together.
Okay.
Yeah. But it is a worthwhile activity. I'm excited that this is the first manual of practice in geoenvironmental engineering. The very, very beginning of this idea, when I had proposed it, I was thinking of DM 7.1, DM 7.2 for geoenvironmental engineering. And so something very, very practical, DM 7.1, the documents by NAVFAC for geoenvironmental engineering, because something like that didn't exist. We didn't go that route along the way. We end up writing more, the NAVFAC is more shorter text with lots of equations. But we end up writing more of a manual/book that had more text and figures than what you see typically in NAVFAC, that has also more equations and design equations. But I think the goal was achieved of having a document that when someone reads it, a specific topic, will get a very good feeling about where things are. By the way, in the United States of America, we have an explicit focus on being an AEC in Geo Institute in the United States. So I think almost exclusively we focused only on US practitioners and to the most part US researchers in putting this together, because that was our goal.
Okay, that actually leads into my next question, because I was going to say, for a lot of the topics that the Geo Institute covers, geology varies so widely across the U.S., and as does engineering practice. There certainly are a lot of different regional aspects, and certainly to geoenvironmental. Some states, agencies, regions, have I'd say wildly different codes and standards for, say, grouting boreholes or other things. Does the manual address like differences in regional practice, or are there caveats to say, your experience may differ?
For sure, I think that is a very important topic, and you kind of mentioned the geology and the variation, and you also mentioned the regulations, and the regulations are very important in geoenvironmental engineering, because we have, of course, the federal regulations that everybody needs to follow, but there are state EPA, state departments of environmental quality, state regulators, basically, who may have higher standards. And so throughout the chapters, depending on the topic tackled, the authors are making references, not exhaustively to see a list of all the states and what the rules are, but they are making reference to differences observed. And definitely, I think you will see it as a theme that you need to be always, when you do this work, know the regulators involved and how they operate, because at the end they're typically reviewing a lot of this work that we're doing here. And so there are different references in different chapters on this type of difference. And I think, again, we're probably not exhaustive on every nuance that there exists between the different states, but I think the reviewer gets the feeling of here's where things are, and then making sure that they talk. I mean, if you're a environmental practitioner, hopefully you're part of a broader team. And if you're young and you're new in the field, you're going to be learning from your team and their experiences in the area that you're working, for sure, before you get into any of these projects.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess discussing a little bit more the development of the manual and the timeline, about how long it took. Was the committee working on other things in there as well? So over the 8 years?
Absolutely. So when Cord Wiseman was the president, I think it is around 2016, he was he became the president of the Geo Institute. I feel he's the one who started pushing a lot on making sure the technical committees get outputs that are of use to the industry. And this is where we said, okay, like this is where this fit, this in that vision, our work fit, and that's how I said, okay, let's do this manual. Now, we never thought that this will be, at that time, the projects were also 1 year or 2 years, and you could extend it in 3 years. And I personally knew that 3 years will be amazing if we were able to achieve it. And but at the end, I wanted, again, something that will last, something that once we do it, now, as you said, it's the first one, but in general, will have an impact on the industry, something that, and so we knew that we had a broader horizon. And but the committee was very active on many other things. For example, we just finished this, but as you mentioned before, we have our technical conference in environmental engineering happening next month in September in Portland. So there's lots of committee members that have been working on this. We've published webinars. We've been always part of the web conferences. We're always in the annual meetings, and have done lots of other activities. I have to say, I have stepped down. Arvin Farid is now, who is an author of a chapter of the manual, and is also the chair of the environmental committee now. And we have a very active committee. We're blessed to have very active members who are doing many things. And I think so basically that document was going along the way with everything else, with its ups and downs as it was moving forward. As I mentioned, it was COVID definitely that affected. I also moved from the University of Michigan to UC Berkeley, and that affected my ability for 6 months at least to focus on this specifically. And then each of the authors, of course, had other things that they were working on. But I think what matters is that we put it together, and And I think it's a great document when I see it. I'm very proud of my committee members and the individuals. If you go through the authors, you will see, and that we don't say for each individual person if they're a committee member or not, but I will say overwhelmingly they are committee members, but there are also individuals who are involved who are not committee members, but did a lot of work. Yeah, so overall we've been. I will say that we have a very good active Geoenvironmental Committee, and anybody who listens today and wants to be involved in the committee, please contact Arvin Farid, and also go to the website. You can find Arvin's contact information through the Geo Institute website, because we'll be very glad to have you on board and contribute to our activities.
Cool. I suppose it's actually a good time to talk a little bit about the GI website. So if you're interested in putting together your own manual of practice, or contributing rather to it, our 20 technical committees are available to listen to your ideas and potentially help deliver a number of types of different publications. As Dimitrios mentioned, GI puts on webinars. We're looking forward to our December webinar series put on by our technical committees, and certainly the Geo Institute website is a rich resource for a lot of the things that we do. Updates from the technical committees and information, different types of products like the geotech tools part. And, I'm surprised that I hadn't thought to mention it already, now that we're about halfway into our time. If you are interested yourself in purchasing a copy of the Manual of Practice, it is available in both physical hard copy for those of you that like the book itself, as well as an ebook. And you can hit the ASCE library website and pick which format you'd like, and you can purchase it today. So it is available for you to have and own in 2 different formats. So Dimitrios, how was it like to work with ASCE Publications? I imagine just putting the manual together, even once you had all the content, was probably challenging, trying to get the various references and citations and photo credits or other things. Do you find it a good experience?
Yes, absolutely. I want to thank the ASCE Publications, because frankly, that part was the easy one. They're very clear on what they need, in my view, at least my experience with the manual. And I have authored, also contributed to geotechnical special publications, but they were very clear on what is necessary, and from the very beginning. And so they were checking in on me. I think at some point they were worried that maybe we're not going to do it, but we were planning to do it. And overall, they give you, there are things that are important beyond that. This is a manual of practice. The referencing, as you mentioned, the figures, you cannot just take any figure from anywhere you found it and just drop it in a book like that. There are rules. You need to get permissions. But they told me that stuff from the beginning, and I passed that information to all the authors, saying every figure that you include, make sure, if it is an ASCE figure, it's easy. You actually don't need to do anything. If it's not an ASCE figure, go get permission or create a different one. And actually, I think the authors were prepared for this, and that, we had to put together all the documentation related to this, and was a lot of documentation. But I think ASCE Publications has been a very good experience for me in terms of on the support on this. And then once we delivered them the document that has passed through the Blue Ribbon panel also. They worked very, very well. They had a specific schedule that they stuck to it, and I was very happy to see that. And so they said, okay, once we have it, by July it will be published, and it was indeed. Donna was the person who was in charge of the publications when we started this, and she was fantastic, very, very supportive. All the way now, of course, to the team, the Dana's team, and Michi Glatz, who was doing the editing. Lots of people contributed to make this happen, I think the experience from the ASCE Publications I think if you understand the rules and you understand what they tell you, that they're serious when they're telling you, I need this documentation, and they're not going to back off from it later, and you're prepared for it, I think it's straightforward. I do want to say also, because I described here, and we have an horizon of almost 8 years when this was published. From the time, of course, 2000, I want to just clarify, 2016, we started working on it in terms of, what chapters do we need? It's not like we've been writing for 5 years, right? And so here's the chapters, and that was evolving. And so I think from conceptualization in 2016 to publication for a manual of practice I think it's not too bad, actually. I'm happy with it. I do want to say, though, because I don't want anybody who is thinking of publishing something to say, I need a decade for this, to explain that there are lots of other different levels. There's the geotechnical special publications that have a review process but don't have the blue ribbon panel. And even geotechnical practice publications. And I know all of those are going through you also, Derrick, in terms of looking at what is coming up. But geotechnical practice publication is a document of a team, but it doesn't require a review process like the geotechnical special publication. So depending on what you have in mind, I think it can be relatively quick, for sure. Definitely. I have been involved in a few geotechnical special publications, and those also came up much quicker, within a couple of years, for sure.
Yeah, it would certainly be great if we could see more of our committees interested in putting together manuals of practice. I think they serve a valuable function, certainly for documenting, what's currently happening in the different technical spaces that, perhaps maybe what's going on is not standardized or still developing, but people who are using different types of technology, if it's unmanned aerial aircraft or photogrammetry or change detection or some of the other exciting things that are happening in different areas of civil and geotechnical engineering. I think a lot of times, sometimes papers get written and then maybe lost someplace and aren't as easy to find maybe as we'd like. But certainly the geotechnical practice publications, the special publications, manuals of practice, and even some books. We've got a couple of our committees that are working on different types of short book publications. The Shallow Foundations Committee did So Your Home is Built on Expansive Soils, and Embankments, Dams, and Slopes has been putting together some work based on some failures and other types of information. So let's see. What are some of the other things I wanted to ask you? I know it's difficult when you put something together. Do you have a favorite topic in the book? I just like some of the names of the chapters, like contaminant, transport, and fate.
Yeah.
So
that is the first chapter that Joe Scalia and Chuck Shackelford put together, and it starts with that many things in geoenvironmental engineering. The understanding the processes by which a contaminant is somewhere. You can find it somewhere. Started from the source of a contamination. And it's there now, but depending on the groundwater regime and even the above the groundwater, the unsaturated zone, you may find it elsewhere. So that's what we mean with fate, where it's going. It may be absorbed, it may be pushed downstream from different processes. And I think that's a very key part. So we start with this chapter in the manual because it's if you don't have, I guess that in geoenvironmental engineering, that's one of the steps. In addition to understanding the stratigraphy and the properties of the subsurface conditions for the soil and the rock, you need to understand where the contamination is. That is really the driver for later on coming up with any remediation scheme or containment scheme of, because depending on where the contaminant is, some techniques are possible and some of them are not possible. So it's a very important chapter, and we start with that. And then we have, you ask for favorite chapters. I like all the chapters. I'm impressed with the work that everybody put. We continue on characterization. Neven Matasovich talks about the geotechnical characterization, especially from in situ testing. There's a lot that goes into geotechnical characterization of contaminants and especially waste materials. And at the same time, we have also Marisa Chrysochou and Nefeli Boboti talking about the chemical characterization, geochemical characterization of the solids, the liquids, and the gases associated with the contamination. And then we go into talking about different types of waste materials. And we talked about municipal solid waste. Maybe that's my favorite topic because I've been doing this work since my PhD. But municipal solid waste, hazardous waste, Prabir Kolai and Rudy Bonaparte contributed to that a lot. Coal ash materials, biomass, fly ash, and basically these are significant volumes of waste materials that need to be taken care of properly to ensure public health. And that was the biomass one that Susan Burns from Georgia Tech led. And then we go into and describe a lot, the different types of containment systems. And we have John McCartney led the chapter on containment systems, base containment systems. If you have a landfill or a coal ash facility or any other containment facility, you need to make sure that you design that. And it's not strict, you have to, there are things to know, there are significant details that matter in terms of how you put together basically geosynthetics, plastic materials, as well as soils, clays, and gravel, depending on what you're trying to do, facilitate flow or impede flow. And so design of base containment system. And then Richard Thiel, a leading practitioner, led the chapter on cover systems. So once you have put the waste, how do you cover it? And once you have that, of course, there are issues related to making sure the whole thing stays put there. That's how we got into this as geotechnical engineers at the very beginning. You can have failure, you can have the whole thing slide down. And so we have Kevin Foy talking about leading the chapter on static stability assessment of the containment systems. And then Ed Kavazanjan led the chapter on seismic stability of the containment systems. The field of geoenvironmental engineering has moved a lot, has proceeded, definitely tremendous progress in the late 80s, 90s, 2000s, but still there's so much happening right now. And Chris Berather wrote a chapter on mine waste geotechnics. There is a lot of geoenvironmental issues associated with mine waste geotechnics. That is definitely something we could expand into the future, but he wrote at least a very good chapter, in my view, of the fundamentals associated with that chapter. And so the fundamentals associated with that topic, which they have similarities to other waste containment facilities, but also a lot of differences also. And then we started talking a little bit about different techniques of handling waste materials and contaminated ground. So Karsten Floss led the chapter on excavation and replacement. So like excavating the material, it's not the same if it is contaminated versus not contaminated, as I'm sure you know also, Derrick. So once you have a contaminated ground, there's a whole other level on how you handle that type of excavations. Arvin Farid wrote a chapter on electrokinetics. Anirban De wrote about ground improvement techniques for contaminated grounds and solid waste materials. And at the end, we have two chapters that are at the end, but they're very, very important and really as part of the portfolio of solutions that we have in geoenvironmental engineering. Jeff Evans and Christine Sample-Lord wrote a chapter on barriers that are vertical barriers. So not just putting a liner, and then putting the waste, but many times intercepting basically on the existing conditions and making sure you create a barrier. And Andrei Preproya from Geosyntec wrote a chapter on the opposite. Instead of impeding flow with a barrier, facilitating flow through a barrier that is active and really cleans up the contaminated groundwater as it goes through. And those are two great chapters I really appreciate the effort that these authors and their co-authors put together. So you asked for my favorite. I think, I think my answer should have been that my manual is the manual. The manual is my favorite chapter. Yeah. Yes. But
okay,
yeah,
so here's a question: Are there any like basics that are covered for, I'll say, like geoenvironmental newbies? Most of my geoenvironmental experience was back in college, and it just seems like it's a very dynamic and evolving field, and that there are like so many different, I'll say, types of environmental hazards. You know, the fact that you can have petroleum or chlorofluorocarbons from, you know, dry cleaners that were there 20 years ago and now aren't, or heavy metals or radioactive waste or biohazard, or is there, you know, like a primer that says, hi, you have this type of waste among, you know, a multitude of possible ones, and maybe if not, where might I go to find that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're right. The field has evolved a lot, and I think the manual contributes in this direction. We didn't take it all the way to where you described, where it will be, oh, here is what you have, and here is for this type of contaminants. I actually teach about that in my class in terms of how you prioritize depending on where the contamination is, shallow versus deep, above the water table, below the water table, in what type of subsurface conditions, clay, sands, mixed soils, rock, all of those affect the type of remediation techniques we have, and we have many remediation techniques. But I will say that the manual is for someone who is a geotechnical engineer and starts working in geoenvironmental, or wants to make sure that he checks what he's doing in geoenvironmental practice against others. It's a great document in terms of reading the appropriate chapter and saying, okay, you know, this is how this is being done, and this is where the profession is. It was written in that matter. We stayed away from citing the very latest studies with there's very specialty things. We didn't go all that way, where maybe there is not even consensus, right? And you know, we actually try to explain the principles from a practical perspective, the solutions from a practical perspective, what in our perspective is happening right now in the field. It was not our intent to provide an exhaustive state-of-the-art review of that topic. So I will say, yeah, I mean, there are some very good books in geoenvironmental engineering that really go from the very fundamentals. Hari Sharma's, Krishna Reddy's books on geoenvironmental engineering. These are great books. Ours is not intended to compete with these textbooks. It's intended to really summarize very practical aspects. But because of that, because it is very, very practical aspects associated with each of the problem, I will say that it is a primer. It is a document I will pick up at the beginning, like the first chapter to read, before I go into more details on a specific theme, for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Are there any topics that maybe you intentionally left out, like elephants in the room that somebody had said, it's like, well, you know, the manual of practice is 400 pages. If we include this, it'll be 900, and maybe we'll just leave that for another day, or...
Yes, for sure. First of all, I don't think we went in a significant way in the remediation technologies. There is so much there, and frankly, there are books and manuals, and there is so much. If you were to say, okay, I'm going to start talking about bioremediation and all the other techniques that exist, soil vapor extraction, and all of the techniques that we have, that will have easily double the document. But I feel, because I work in this area, that exists. I don't feel there is a gap there. That's a one. The second one, and I want to make sure I reference that, is mine waste geotechnics. We have one chapter on that. And Chris Barader, I think he did a great job. He almost didn't want to write this chapter because he said, this is not going to be like, it's going to be, there's so much there. I mean, and he's very active and doing a lot of work in this area. And it's a huge discipline on its own, a separate almost discipline on its own. but at the end, we did include one chapter on mine waste geotechnics with a little bit more focus on the things that are closer to geoenvironmental, because I felt like it will be like in 2020s to not talk about that theme is not appropriate. There are lots of geoenvironmental engineers who work in this type of topics. And there is lots of things with acids and drainage of acids and stuff that are very, very important. So mine waste geotechnics, we have a chapter, and we could have 5 chapters. There could be a separate manual in that for sure. The last thing that we didn't put, I do consider it part of geoenvironmental practice, but we didn't include this, is on biogeotechnics here. And biogeotechnics, use of microbes for different types of applications, I think spans into geoenvironmental engineering. It's a newer technique. A lot is happening there. And there is some very good papers by a number of colleagues. We decided not to go there right now, as not being a very big part of geoenvironmental practice right now. But in our conferences, we are typically always have themes related to biogeotechnics that are related to geoenvironmental engineering. Yeah. So definitely, when I'm looking at this chapter, this manual and the chapters we have there, I feel there is more things to include. But at the end, we do have a significant document of 400 pages with lots of good content. And I thought, okay, let's publish this, and then we can always build on it into the future for sure.
Okay. Any key individuals you'd like to give a particular shout out to? I know that the manual has a list of references and acknowledgments and other folks, but
yeah, I mentioned all the authors, the lead authors already before, and they put a lot of effort, and they put a very good document at the beginning, and then they got lots of reviews, and they improved, and then eventually the Blue Ribbon panel. I do want to acknowledge the Blue Ribbon panel again. Professor Jim Mitchell, who has now passed, but was in the panel and provided very good comments. We gave him the whole thing in one Word file, and he went through it, and he had comments on it on the whole Word file. And then Rudy Bonaparte, the practicing engineer, a member of the National Academy, frankly, one of my personal heroes in terms of what he has achieved in his life, who actually wrote, he was not supposed, but he actually wrote pages for each of the chapters, one by one. And then Craig Benson also, who he was also a dean. I think maybe he was stepping down from his dean position at that time, but he spent so much time and provided so useful comments in terms of making it. I was really impressed. I didn't know, you provide to these distinguished colleagues these 400 pages. You don't know what to expect. They all went through it in a significant detail. And Krishna Reddy also stepped in, because Rudy Bonaparte contributed even more extensively in a chapter on hazardous waste. And so Krishna Reddy stepped in to review as a 4th member and independent reviewer of that chapter at the Blue Ribbon level, because that's part of the policies of ASCE. And we appreciate also his work. And so, but I think the work that at the end, I didn't mention all the reviewers who are mentioned in the document, but this was a very big process. I was more the cheerleader, the orchestrator, and putting it all together, maybe having the vision about what this can look, and but it is a big team effort that to put this together. So all of the people there, I'm grateful for their effort, and I hope they will be really useful to the industry, because that was the goal. That's why we put all this energy.
Okay. All right. So as we come to the close of our time together, what's your 1 minute elevator sales pitch to people who are thinking about potentially getting Manual of Practice 159? So if you were to if eventually Brad were to put together, a little snippet to have, what would you say?
Without wanting to make sales, from my perspective, from an output perspective, I think if you are a geoenvironmental engineer, you plan to work, or you are a geoenvironmental engineer, you plan to be in this field, you need to read this manual. You need to go through it, know its content, and start with that. So I will consider it a starting basis that if you are working in the US, I don't think it will be appropriate to be active and have no awareness of the content that is in there. And so I don't want to say a must read or a New York bestseller or whatever, this type of stuff. But I do think that's what we did. The whole technical committee, the Geoenvironmental Engineering Technical Committee, spent a lot of effort for something like this. And I will say that it will be an omission to not be aware of what's in there if you're working in that area, or if you're planning to be. Also for students. I think textbooks are great for students when we teach in this class, but these chapters are concise and very practical, and it will be useful for a student who is getting in this area to get this chapter to get going, for sure.
Okay, well, cool. Well, thanks for spending time with us today. Greatly appreciate it. Again, for those who are interested in geoenvironmental engineering, we have the conference coming up, Portland, Oregon, September 8th through 11th. Look up Geoenvironment 2024 on the web. If you're interested in getting the Manual of Practice in hard copy or as an ebook, head over to the ASCE Library Manual of Practice website. Use your favorite search engine or browser. Type in GI Manual of Practice 159 Environmental. That's how I figured out how to get a copy and learned what I know about it. So it works. And Brad is back, which means we're getting close to our close. So I think, Dimitrios, you and I have had a great conversation. Thank you. And back to Brad.
Thank you, Derrick. Appreciate your time.
Well done, guys. And Dimitrios, don't be afraid to make sales. This is I always tell everybody it's ABC, always be closing. You never know. You could be at a tourist site somewhere and you might make a huge sale of the MOP. But we really appreciate it, and thanks for getting into the thought process behind some of the content that went in and some of the things that were left out, and doing the little pitch for, how you worked through the whole process, because I think it's really daunting, right? When you look at that at the beginning and you say, wow, I have to go through this review and I have to get authors for every single chapter and come up with topics. The list of tasks just really stacks up. And, we're finishing up reviews for Geotechnical Frontiers right now, and that takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And I'm thinking every task that we do in GI, I think requires really like an all hands on deck approach in our community to make it happen. And so this is very cool that this is out. And as people pick it up and read it, or double click that PDF and read it, or whatever you do, I think that sense of community is really, really going to come through, and people will really appreciate that. So for our viewers, if you liked what you saw, and you're here at the end, so you probably did, click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. There is a link in the chat to the aforementioned publication, MOP 159 on geoenvironmental engineering. We will put a link in the show notes below where you're watching this now for all of the people who come and watch this later and aren't seeing it live. And we really appreciate all of you for spending time with us today. Derrick and Dimitrios, thanks again. It was fantastic. And Dana, thanks for being on with us at the beginning. Amber Davis was our producer. The last thing is that our next live stream, a few weeks away, it's August, everybody, as we go on through the GI Summer of Live, we'll be back August 20th with the next GeoStrata Extra from this month's issue, which is on geoenvironmental engineering. So you're going to want to be around for that. Krishna Reddy and Gaurav Verma from the University of Illinois at Chicago will be talking about environmental justice in sight. remediation, characterization, many different things, actually. It's a big topic, but you'll want to be there for that. You can register at Eventbrite and for any of our other upcoming live streams. So everybody enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you very soon.